Okay, to get started, what I'm doing here is I'm using remote desktop to connect to the IPC that I intend to use has the secure viewer client, has truly just a thin client. So the only thing that I will install on this machine is basically the secure viewer client, and then we will configure that to view the project. You can see this PC is kind of fresh out of the box. So at this point, I have not installed any Blue Open Studio, IIS is not enabled, etc. So pretty fresh PC out of the box. Okay, so next step is let's install the Secure Viewer software, Secure Viewer client. It basically is two pieces. It's the actual client software itself and a little config tool that'll, where you set all the basically the connection settings, etc. So I have it here on a USB stick. You'll see there's two files on here. There's the thin client setup, and then there's another one. We'll talk about this file later. Right now, I'm going to run the thin client setup. We'll install it. We'll keep all this standard. This is not the subject of this video, but we'll leave it in there. Okay, finish. And now it should be installed. Okay, so now that we have the Secure Viewer client installed on the client station, now I have remote desktoped into the the computer that I'm going to use as the server. And what I've done is I've pre-created a project here in Blue Open Studio. And you could see, just to give you a picture of what I've done, is I have a main driver sheet. I'm using Modbus, just Modbus TCP. I'm actually communicating to a operator terminal expert HMI running as a Modbus slave, and I just have a bunch of holding registers configured in the HMI, and I'm going to use the master here to just communicate to those registers, and then graphically, I've just made a screen. And you can see here, I've made this screen actually 1920 by 1080, and I'll show you why I mentioned that here in a second. So you could see if I just run this project locally. And again, to talk about what the secure viewer is, part of what the secure viewer is that it's very much like the native viewer that you run, and in fact, that's what it is. When you press play in here, this is effectively running the secure viewer. And you could see here's just a real simple screen that I've created, and etc. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and stop that. Okay. One point to make about the viewer. So you'll notice there is a viewer configuration. All right. One thing to note is I do have the auto screen scaling checkbox checked. So that's basically why everything fit in that space. Okay. So the unit that I have it on actually has a screen mounted to it. So it's an all-in-one panel PC with a screen size of 1024 by 768. So effectively, when I run the viewer, it's effectively running in that 1024 by 768 space. So if I uncheck the scaling and I run it, I'll show you what I mean. Okay, and you can kind of see that's the space that's left. And because I didn't set it up to have scroll bars, etc., I'm kind of stuck there. So I'm going to just stop it. go back to the viewer, check the screen scaling, click OK, press play again, and now everything fits. Okay. One thing I also wanted to talk about here, we could to discuss is you also have the ability to see what clients are connecting, remote clients, whether they're secure viewer clients or they're mobile access clients. You can see basically if you right click, if you go to your system tray and you find the TCP/IP server icon and you right click, you can look at current sessions. So what I'd like to point out here is that first of all, this is telling me what I'm licensed to, and you could see the license that I have is for up to 5 thin clients, and you could see it telling me right now that I have one connection from the viewer client, which is basically this internal one, and you could see it's actually not using, it's not consuming any thin client licenses at this point. Okay, so I'll close that and I will shut down my project. Okay, so now the first scenario that I want to run through as far as using Secure Viewer is a scenario where we're very simply we're going to have we have our runtime machine here running on a PC, and it's for all intents and purposes all we're discussing here is that it's a runtime, communicating to the PLC, and I want one remote computer, thin client, running Windows to connect to it using Secure Viewer. And one of the reasons why we go over this is a very simple way. Uh, it's a very simple implementation. And so, okay, so what we're going to do is so locally here on the server computer, I have the project created. I'm going to just simply I go up here to the project, I right click, I open the folder in Project Explorer. So you can see here is my project folder. Okay, so this remote access demo, if you open it up, here's all the associated folders. And at the end of the day, the .app file is the thing that kind of glues it all together. So I'm going to go back here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just simply going to make a copy of this. And I'm going to paste it on my thumb drive. And then I am going to take that thumb drive over to the client machine. Okay, so here we are back at the client computer. And the first thing I will point out is what I did is I pre-created a place to store the project folder that I'm bringing over from the server/development environment. Okay, you can see I just put it on the C drive, just in client app storage. Here's the remote access demo, and you can see I've copied the entire folder to that location. Okay, so now in a previous step, we installed the Secure Viewer Thin Client onto this computer. The Secure Viewer Thin Client effectively gives you two different items in your programs group. One of them is the configuration and one of them is the viewer itself. So what we can do here is we can, obviously the first thing we need to do is go into the configuration. Okay. And you can see the default settings for the configuration. You can kind of get a picture of what the viewer is really doing, because this is effectively on the server/build time machine. This you have this same viewer configuration file, only it's by default it's reaching into itself, so to speak, through the local host and through this through the default port. So in this case, since we're remote, we just simply need to type in the IP address of the remote server, the runtime computer. Okay, so the IP address, the port, that's the encrypted channel. And then in the URL field, what we're going to do is, in this case, what we're going to do is we're simply going to browse to the app file. So I'm going to go into my client app storage, into here, and point to and simply just point to the app file. And you can see here you can enable a splash window or not, which is basically just the blue Open Studio splash screen that comes up, and enable or not the progress bar. Okay. Then very important, make sure you save. Okay. So now effectively what you've written is you've basically have created an INI configuration in the client. Okay. That the viewer will use when it starts. So okay, so now we actually need to go back to the server. Okay, so now we're back at the server, and I'm going to go into my development environment, and I'm going to start the project. Okay, because the project needs to be running on the runtime computer in order for the secure viewer to connect to it. Okay? So I'm going to press run, and you can see here's my local viewer. I'll call up the current sessions, and you can see one connection, 0 thin clients. And I'll just put that down over there. Okay. And now I'll go back to my client. I can leave that up, and I'm going to run the secure viewer. Splash screen, and we have a problem. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show you what the problem here is in a second, but basically we're trying to connect to the viewer. I says I cannot connect to the server. So I'm just going to click OK, start over, and then I'll go back to the runtime computer into the server. And I'll actually go ahead and I'm going to stop the project. Okay. So the reason that the secure viewer could not connect is because one of the services in slash runtime task is not running by default, and you have to set it that way. Okay. So in the development machine under runtime task, okay, the thing that needs to be running is this TCP/IP server. Okay. That is what the secure viewer was trying to make a connection to this, and since it wasn't running, it wouldn't connect. So in this case, this is fairly new. By default, I don't know when this changed. By default, I believe this used to be automatic, but it is set to manual. So you do need to set it to automatic. I'll click OK. Okay, now I'll run my project. Okay. Back to the client, same settings. Okay, and there you go. So now you can see I'm communicating, I'm getting the data from the server, but the visualization pieces are all coming through from the local app file. Okay, so now let's talk about the data server connection and configuration. So here back in the client, you can see in the secure viewer configuration piece, we're telling it the data server IP address, which is the runtime computer, and we're giving it the IP address, and we are giving it what port to connect to, 51234. Okay. So now, if we go back to the server computer, where that is actually set up is under Project and then Communication. And if you go under the Project and the Communication tab, you'll notice this piece called the Data Server. And you can see I have it matching here. So this is the encrypted port. This is in default. This is enabled by default. And you can see that's where it matches the 51234. So that's where that's set up. So of course, if you need to have the flexibility to change these ports, you have the ability to do it. You just have to remember to do it at both ends. And then one last point to make is if I switch back to the server and I look at my current sessions now, you can see that it shows both. You can see it shows the local viewer client. It has a connection, not consuming a thin client license, but you can see here, this is an undefined user, okay, but this is the client, the viewer client, and this is consuming a thin client license. Okay, so our second technique to, I guess for an ease of use example for using Secure Viewer as your thin client is what we've actually done, or what I've actually done here is I have set up a file sharing system the between my two computers, between my thin client and my server computer. I just have a simple file sharing system set up. And you can see here I've set up a share. This is the name of the server computer. And if I go into here, I can see I've set up a share folder. And inside here, I've essentially put the project folder again with all the way drilling down into the app file. All right. So now what I can do is in my configuration now, this is going to look a little bit different. Okay. The data server part is going to stay the same, right? Because the data is still coming through this channel, so to speak. Okay. But for the URL now, what I'm going to do is you could see, okay, I'm going to go to the share. I'm going to go to the server computer. There's that shared folder that I'm using. Drill in a couple folders deep. You only need one folder deep for this to work. Point to the app file, say open. This is now my settings, so I'm using the path to the secureviewer.app file over the shared system. Okay, and then I'm going to save. Okay, and then I'm going to run the viewer, and now you can see. Okay, so the advantage here is you don't need to say manually carry the USB stick, etc., over to the client station. You can simply use file share, and if you need to make updates to the program, just change, basically just change what you're sharing. So then the third technique to talk about when it comes to Secure Viewer is perhaps in a situation where you didn't have access to file sharing, but you still wanted to make a connection um, over the network rather than just using a local app file, for example. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go into this all hinges on IIS, etc., which is another part of the discussion. But in the server now, I have IIS configured, and you'll see in the default website what I've done is I have basically pointed it to the my Blue Open Studio project, right? So all the way down into the remote access demos. So you could see the full path in here. Okay, so I'm just going to click OK from there. I'll restart the server. Okay, go into the runtime or go into the editor and start the project. Okay, and then I will go to my client machine. So then in my client machine, what I'm going to do is simply, so this is still the data server. So now in the URL, instead of a file share location or just a literal file location on the PC, I have the HTTP, I have the IP address of the server, and then basically just drill all the way down into the app. So I'm going to save that, close, and then we'll run the viewer, and there's the screen.